A few years ago, I watched a close friend slowly give up on the life he once dreamed about. There was no dramatic failure, no sudden disaster, just a quiet, almost invisible surrender. At 32 years old, Daniel had already convinced himself that his life would probably never change. Not in any meaningful way. He still went to work every morning. He still talked about ideas and possibilities. He still said things like, "One day I'll figure things out." But if you listened closely, there was always a sentence that followed. People like me don't usually get those opportunities. I'm probably not the type of person they're looking for. I guess some people are just luckier. And slowly, almost without noticing, Daniel began to build a life that matched those beliefs. The strange thing was that Daniel wasn't lazy. He wasn't careless. In fact, he was one of the most intelligent and hard-working people I knew. But there was something deeper happening beneath the surface. Like many people, Daniel believed manifestation was about wanting something badly enough, about visualizing success, writing goals, or waiting for the right moment to appear. Yet every time life presented him with a chance to move forward, something inside him pulled him back. Not fear exactly, more like a quiet voice whispering, "This probably isn't meant for you." And that voice shaped his decisions more than he realized. Here's the truth most people never learn. Your brain is not a wishing machine. It is a prediction machine. Every single day, your mind predicts what kind of life you will have. It does this by studying the thoughts you repeat most often, the beliefs you hold about yourself, and the stories you tell yourself when no one else is around. If deep down you believe success belongs to someone else, if you secretly think you're not confident enough, talented enough, or capable enough, your brain will guide your choices in ways that quietly confirm that belief. Not because you are weak, but because the mind is designed to protect what feels familiar. That was Daniel's invisible prison, until one small decision began to change everything. One morning, during his long commute to work, Daniel decided to start listening to mindset audiobooks, not once in a while, but every single day. He didn't expect some magical transformation. He simply wondered if feeding his mind different ideas might slowly shift the way he saw himself. Weeks passed, then months. Something subtle began to happen. Daniel started speaking differently about his future. He started taking small risks he would have avoided before. He began applying for opportunities that once felt out of reach. A year later, his life looked completely different. A new role, more confidence, more freedom in the way he approached his work and relationships. It wasn't luck, and it certainly wasn't magic. Daniel had simply done something most people never do. He trained his mind. That's what this audiobook is about. Not wishful thinking, not empty motivation, but the daily practice of strengthening your mindset, reshaping your beliefs, and gradually becoming the kind of person who creates the life they once only imagined. Over the next hour, you'll discover powerful principles that can help you reprogram the patterns inside your mind and open doors that once felt impossible. So take a moment, breathe, and listen with an open mind. And if someone you care about is feeling stuck, discouraged, or unsure about their future, share this video with them. Sometimes the right message, heard at the right moment, can become the turning point that helps someone begin building the life they truly deserve. Chapter 1. The Hidden Programming of Your Mind. There is a quiet force shaping your life every day, and most people never notice it. It doesn't appear in your calendar. You won't see it written in your goals, and it rarely announces itself with dramatic moments. Yet it influences how you speak, how you decide, and how you respond to opportunities when they appear. This force is your mental programming. Long before we begin consciously designing our lives, our minds start building a map of what feels possible and what does not. That map is formed through thousands of small experiences, things we hear, things we observe, and the conclusions we quietly draw about ourselves. Over time, those conclusions become beliefs, and beliefs become filters through which we interpret the world. Two people can experience the exact same opportunity and walk away with completely different outcomes, simply because their internal programming interprets the situation differently. I remember noticing this clearly when I worked with two colleagues early in my career. Both of them were talented. Both worked in the same department, had similar responsibilities, and had been at the company for almost the same amount of time. Yet their careers moved in very different directions. One of them, Jason, had an interesting habit. Whenever a new challenge appeared, a difficult project, a presentation, or a leadership opportunity, his first reaction was curiosity. He would say things like, "That sounds interesting. I wonder if I could figure that out." The other colleague, Michael, had a different reaction. Whenever similar opportunities appeared, he would often respond with something like, "That's probably better suited for someone more experienced." Neither man was being dishonest. Both were simply responding according to what their minds believed was realistic for them. Over the next few years, something predictable happened. Jason kept taking on projects that stretched his abilities. Some went well, others didn't. But each experience expanded his confidence and reputation within the company. Michael, meanwhile, continued doing solid work in his role. But because he rarely stepped outside his comfort zone, fewer opportunities naturally found their way to him. Eventually, Jason moved into a leadership position. Michael stayed where he was. From the outside, it might have looked like Jason was simply more ambitious. But when you looked closer, the difference was more subtle. Jason believed challenges were opportunities to grow. Michael believed challenges were situations where he might be exposed. Two different mental programs, two different life paths. What makes this even more fascinating is that most of these programs were written long before either of them entered that office. Some come from childhood experiences. Others come from teachers, family members, cultural expectations, or moments when we succeeded or failed at something that felt important. A single comment heard at the wrong moment can quietly echo in a person's mind for years. A child who hears, "You're not very good at this," enough times may eventually stop trying, even if they had the potential to improve. A student who once solved a difficult problem and heard someone say, "You're really good at thinking things through," may carry that confidence into adulthood without even realizing it. These early impressions become the invisible scripts guiding how we interpret our abilities. And once those scripts are in place, the mind begins doing something remarkable. It searches for evidence that confirms them. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as confirmation bias, but you don't need scientific terminology to recognize it. You've probably seen it in everyday life. Someone who believes people are generally kind will notice small acts of generosity almost everywhere. Someone who believes the world is unfair will often notice examples that reinforce that belief. Neither person is completely wrong. They are simply seeing the world through different mental filters. The same principle applies to how we see ourselves. If someone quietly believes, "I'm the kind of person who struggles with money," their mind will unconsciously justify spending habits, career decisions, and financial choices that support that identity. If another person believes, "I'm the kind of person who learns and adapts," their mind will naturally look for solutions when challenges appear. These patterns don't operate through conscious intention. They operate through familiarity. The brain prefers what feels known. This is why people sometimes remain in situations that clearly limit their potential. Not because they enjoy those situations, but because stepping outside them requires rewriting an internal program that has existed for years. Changing that program is uncomfortable at first, but it is also the beginning of personal transformation. Think about it this way. If your mind has been practicing a certain belief for 10 or 20 years, it will naturally feel stronger than a new idea you only started considering last week. Mental programming works through repetition. The thoughts you repeat become the beliefs you carry, and the beliefs you carry influence the choices you make when life presents you with new possibilities. This is why the first step in training your mind is not forcing yourself to think positive thoughts all day. The first step is awareness. You begin by noticing the internal dialogue that runs quietly in the background of your decisions. What do you tell yourself when something difficult appears? What assumptions do you make about your own potential? What stories do you repeat about who you are and what kind of life is realistic for you? These questions may seem simple, but they reveal the programming that quietly shapes your future. Once you become aware of those patterns, something powerful happens. You begin to realize that many of your beliefs are not permanent truths. They are learned interpretations. And anything that has been learned can also be relearned. But awareness alone is not enough. Even when people recognize limiting beliefs, they often struggle to replace them with something stronger. Which raises an important question. If our minds are shaped by repeated thoughts and experiences, how do we begin rewriting the patterns that have guided us for so long? The answer begins with understanding a principle that quietly governs how the human brain accepts new ideas. And that principle is something we will explore in the next chapter. Chapter 2. Why most people never manifest the life they want. There is a quiet misunderstanding that keeps many people stuck for years. They believe that wanting something strongly enough will eventually bring it into their lives. They imagine success. They think about the future they hope to have. They may even write down their goals and read them every morning. And yet, despite all that effort, their lives continue to follow the same familiar pattern. The reason is simple, but often overlooked. Most people try to change their results without changing their identity. They focus on what they want to have instead of who they need to become. Your mind does not create a life based on wishes. It creates a life based on the person it believes you are. And that belief quietly shapes thousands of small decisions every day. I once saw this pattern very clearly in someone I knew growing up. My cousin Mark had always dreamed of running his own business. Whenever the family gathered for holidays, he would talk about ideas he had. Small companies he wanted to start, products he believed people would buy, plans he hoped to try someday. The ideas were good. Some of them were genuinely creative, but there was always something interesting about the way Mark spoke about his dreams. He talked about them as if they belonged to a different version of himself. He would say things like, "If I were more organized, I'd probably try this." Or, "If I had the confidence, I might start something like that." In other words, the dream existed, but the identity didn't. And because the identity didn't exist, the dream stayed safely in the future. Years passed this way. Mark worked steady jobs, paid his bills, and occasionally returned to the same conversations about business ideas. Then something shifted. One evening we were talking about work, and Mark said something different. He didn't talk about the business idea first. Instead, he said, "I've been thinking, maybe I need to start seeing myself as someone who builds things." It was a small sentence, but it marked the beginning of a quiet transformation. Instead of waiting until he felt ready, Mark started making decisions as if he already were the kind of person who created opportunities. He began reading about entrepreneurship every morning before work. He started talking to people who ran small businesses. He even volunteered to help a friend manage a small online store, just to understand how things worked behind the scenes. None of these actions were dramatic, but each one reinforced a new identity. Instead of saying, "I wish I could start a business," his daily behavior began to say, "I'm someone who learns how businesses work." Within a year, something remarkable happened. Mark didn't suddenly launch a massive company, but he did start something small, a modest online service that solved a problem for a niche group of customers. At first, it was just a side project. Then it slowly grew. What changed wasn't luck. What changed was identity. This pattern appears everywhere in life. Someone who believes they are a confident speaker eventually accepts invitations to present ideas. Someone who believes they are bad with money avoids learning about finances. Someone who believes they are resilient tries again after failure. Someone who believes they are unlucky stops trying earlier than others. The external result usually follows the internal identity. This is why many people struggle with manifestation. They imagine a better life, but they continue thinking of themselves in the same limited way. and the mind always protects the identity it already recognizes. Think about it like this. Imagine someone who secretly believes they are not very creative. If you ask that person to write an idea for a new project, they might hesitate. They might assume someone else will produce something better. But if that same person began telling themselves a different story, "I'm someone who practices creativity," their behavior would slowly change. They would experiment more. They would allow themselves to produce imperfect ideas, and over time, their creative ability would grow. Not because they magically became talented overnight, but because their identity allowed them to keep practicing. The mind does something fascinating when identity shifts. It begins searching for evidence to support the new belief. Opportunities that once felt intimidating start to feel interesting. Risks that once felt dangerous begin to feel like experiments. And small wins begin reinforcing the new story. But there is an important detail many people miss. Identity does not change because you say one powerful affirmation once. It changes through repetition, through the actions you take again and again, even when the results are still small. Your brain watches your behavior carefully. Every repeated action becomes proof of who you are. If you consistently act like someone who learns, your mind eventually accepts the identity of a learner. If you consistently act like someone who avoids challenges, your mind accepts the identity of someone who plays small. This is why small daily decisions matter far more than occasional bursts of motivation. A single day of inspiration may feel powerful, but a month of consistent behavior rewrites identity. And once identity shifts, the direction of your life begins to shift with it. This realization leads to an important question. If identity is shaped by repeated experiences and thoughts, how can someone intentionally strengthen a new belief about themselves? How do you train your mind to accept a new version of who you are becoming? The answer lies in a principle that quietly influences how every human brain learns. It is the power of repetition. And in the next chapter, we will explore why the thoughts and ideas you expose your mind to every day eventually become the reality your brain starts to believe. Chapter 3. The Power of Repetition. How your brain learns to believe new possibilities. If there is one principle that quietly shapes the direction of a person's life, it is this. The mind believes what it hears repeatedly, not what it hears once. Not what it hears during a moment of motivation, but what it hears again and again until the message begins to feel familiar. Repetition is how the brain learns what is normal. Think about how children learn language. A child doesn't understand grammar rules or vocabulary lists in the beginning. Instead, they hear the same words spoken around them day after day. Slowly, the sounds become recognizable. The patterns begin to make sense. Eventually, what once felt confusing becomes natural. The same process happens with beliefs. When a certain idea repeats in your mind often enough, it slowly begins to feel true, even if it once felt unrealistic. This is why the environments we spend time in matter so much. The conversations we hear, the stories we absorb, and the thoughts we repeat internally all become part of the mental atmosphere shaping our beliefs. I saw this principle unfold in a simple but powerful way through a friend of mine named Daniel. Daniel had always believed he was terrible at public speaking. The idea of standing in front of a group made him nervous, and whenever the opportunity appeared, he found ways to avoid it. In college, if a presentation was optional, he chose the written assignment. At work, if a meeting needed someone to present information, he quietly hoped someone else would volunteer first. For years, this belief remained unchallenged. One day, his manager suggested something unexpected. Instead of asking Daniel to give a long presentation, she invited him to start with something small. During their weekly team meetings, Daniel would simply share a 2-minute update about the progress of his projects. 2 minutes. That was all. At first, even that felt uncomfortable. His voice sounded uncertain, and he worried about saying the wrong thing. But because the expectation was small, he continued doing it. Week after week, the 2-minute updates became routine. Then something interesting happened. After a few months, Daniel noticed that he no longer felt the same level of anxiety when speaking. The words came more easily. His thoughts felt clearer. Eventually, he volunteered to present a short overview of a project his team had completed. A year earlier, that would have seemed impossible, but repetition had changed the experience. What Daniel once interpreted as a threatening situation gradually became a familiar one. His brain had learned a new pattern. This is exactly how mental training works. When you expose your mind to empowering ideas repeatedly, those ideas slowly become part of your internal dialogue. At first, they may feel slightly uncomfortable. A thought like, "I am capable of creating the life I want," might feel unfamiliar if your past experiences have suggested otherwise. But familiarity grows through repetition. The brain is designed to adapt to patterns, and once a pattern becomes familiar, the brain begins to treat it as normal. This is why listening to empowering messages every day can be so powerful. It is not about instant transformation. It is about slowly adjusting the internal atmosphere of your thoughts. Imagine planting a small seed in soil. If you dig up the soil every few hours to check whether the seed has grown, you will only interrupt the process. Growth happens quietly beneath the surface. Beliefs grow the same way. The thoughts you plant in your mind today may not produce visible change tomorrow, but if those thoughts continue appearing in your mental environment, your brain slowly reorganizes the way it interprets challenges and opportunities. At first, the change may be subtle. You might notice yourself responding differently to situations that once felt intimidating. You might become more curious when new opportunities appear, or you may simply begin questioning assumptions you once accepted automatically. These small shifts are often the earliest signs that the mind is adjusting to new possibilities. But repetition does something even more important. It weakens old patterns. Every belief you carry has been strengthened through years of repetition. Moments when certain thoughts were reinforced again and again. When you begin introducing new ideas into your mental environment consistently, the brain gradually gives those ideas more space. It is similar to walking through a forest. The first time you walk through a certain area, there may be no clear path. The ground is covered with leaves, branches, and uneven terrain. But if you walk the same route every day, something changes. The ground becomes smoother. The leaves compress under your steps. Eventually, a visible path appears. Your mind works in a similar way. Repeated thoughts create mental pathways, and the more often a pathway is used, the easier it becomes for your brain to travel that direction. This is why listening to the same empowering ideas regularly can slowly reshape how you think. You're not forcing yourself to believe something overnight. You're simply creating new pathways. Over time, those pathways become the default routes your mind takes when interpreting the world. But repetition alone is not enough. For a belief to truly influence your life, it must connect with something deeper than words. It must connect with emotion. Ideas that carry emotional meaning are remembered more strongly by the brain. They feel more significant, more personal, more real. This is why stories often impact us more deeply than instructions. When we hear about someone overcoming a challenge or transforming their life, we feel the emotional journey behind the lesson. And that emotional connection helps the mind absorb the message more deeply. So if repetition builds the pathway, emotion strengthens the connection. Together, they create powerful changes in the way the mind interprets reality. But this raises another important question. If repetition and emotion help the brain adopt new beliefs, how can we intentionally combine these two forces in a way that trains the mind every single day? That is exactly what we will explore in the next chapter. Chapter 4. Emotion, the secret force that turns thoughts into reality. Repetition teaches the mind what to notice, but emotion teaches the mind what truly matters. This is one of the most powerful, yet overlooked aspects of mental training. People often focus on the words they repeat to themselves, the goals they write down, or the plans they carefully design. But what the brain actually remembers most clearly is not the words. It is the feeling attached to them. Emotion is the signal that tells the brain, "This is important. Pay attention to this." Think about your own memories for a moment. You may struggle to remember what you had for lunch 3 days ago, but you probably remember very clearly a moment when you felt deeply excited, embarrassed, proud, or afraid. Emotion leaves an imprint. The brain stores emotional experiences more vividly because they are connected to survival and meaning. From an evolutionary perspective, remembering emotionally significant events helped humans navigate danger, relationships, and opportunities. And that same mechanism still influences how our minds shape beliefs today. When a thought is repeated with strong emotion, it becomes more than just a passing idea. It becomes a message that the brain treats as meaningful. This is why some people repeat positive affirmations for months without feeling much change. They say the words, but the words remain neutral. Without emotion, the brain hears the sentence but does not attach importance to it. I once observed this difference very clearly while helping a friend prepare for a career transition. Her name was Alicia, and she had spent nearly 10 years working in a field that left her feeling drained and uninspired. She often talked about wanting to pursue a more creative career, something that allowed her to design and build ideas instead of following strict routines. For months, she tried repeating affirmations she had read online. "I'm creative. I attract opportunities. I'm capable of building a fulfilling career." She repeated them faithfully every morning, but nothing seemed to change. One evening, during a long conversation, something interesting happened. Instead of repeating the affirmation, Alicia began describing the kind of life she imagined living if she followed her creative interests. Her voice changed. She talked about waking up excited to start a project, about collaborating with people who valued imagination, about feeling proud of work that reflected her own ideas. As she described that future, her energy shifted. The words carried enthusiasm and curiosity. For the first time, the vision wasn't just a sentence, it was an emotional experience. That moment revealed something important. The brain responds far more strongly to imagined experiences that carry emotion than to neutral statements repeated without feeling. When Alicia later returned to her daily practice, she changed the approach. Instead of repeating affirmations mechanically, she spent a few minutes visualizing herself living the creative life she had described. She imagined the environment, the conversations, the satisfaction of finishing meaningful work. And most importantly, she allowed herself to feel the excitement of that possibility. Slowly, something shifted in the way she approached her real-life decisions. She began enrolling in small design workshops during weekends. She connected with people in creative industries. She experimented with freelance projects that allowed her to explore different skills. None of these steps happened overnight, but they began happening naturally. Emotion had turned a distant idea into something that felt personally meaningful. This illustrates an important principle. Thoughts influence behavior, but emotions energize action. A thought without emotion often fades quickly. A thought combined with emotion becomes motivation. Your brain is constantly asking a quiet question: is this important enough to remember? Emotion answers that question. When an idea is repeated while you feel inspired, curious, hopeful, or determined, the brain interprets that emotional signal as a reason to strengthen the belief. Over time, that belief begins influencing how you interpret situations in everyday life. A challenge that once looked intimidating might start looking like an opportunity to prove something to yourself. A small setback might begin to feel like feedback rather than failure. Emotion reshapes interpretation, and interpretation reshapes behavior. But emotion is not something you can force artificially. You cannot simply command yourself to feel inspired. Instead, emotion grows from meaning. When an idea connects to something you deeply care about, Freedom, growth, creativity, security, contribution, it naturally generates emotional energy. This is why powerful goals are rarely just about material success. They are about the feelings associated with the life someone wants to create. Freedom to design your own schedule, confidence to express your ideas, pride in building something meaningful, connection with people who share your vision. These emotional experiences give goals their power. Without them, goals remain distant concepts. With them, goals become personal missions. And when the mind begins associating strong emotions with a new vision of the future, it gradually shifts how it responds to opportunities. Instead of asking, "What if I fail?" the mind may begin asking, "What if this moves me closer to the life I imagine?" That subtle shift in perspective changes the direction of many small choices. But there is another element that strengthens this process even further. Emotion becomes even more powerful when it is supported by daily habits. Because habits transform emotional motivation into consistent action. You may feel inspired by a vision of your future today. But if there is no daily structure supporting that vision, the emotion eventually fades. However, when small habits reinforce the emotional goal every day, something remarkable begins to happen. The vision stops feeling like a distant possibility. It begins feeling like a path you are already walking. So the question becomes this: how do you build simple daily habits that reinforce the beliefs and emotions, shaping the life you want to create? That is exactly what we will explore in the next chapter. Chapter 5. Daily Habits. The bridge between vision and reality. Many people believe that transformation happens in a single powerful moment. They imagine that one day they will suddenly feel ready, confident, and fully prepared to create the life they want. They wait for a burst of motivation, a perfect opportunity, or a dramatic breakthrough that will finally change everything. But real transformation rarely works that way. Most meaningful change is much quieter. It happens through small actions repeated day after day, often so subtle that they hardly feel significant in the moment. Yet over time, those small actions shape identity, confidence, and direction in ways that dramatic moments rarely do. Daily habits are the bridge between the life you imagine and the life you actually experience. Without habits, visions remain ideas. With habits, visions begin to take physical form in the world. I remember a conversation with a former co-worker named Rachel that illustrated this principle perfectly. Rachel had always been fascinated by writing. She talked often about the books she hoped to write someday and the ideas she carried with her for years. But like many people with creative dreams, she struggled to begin. She had a demanding job, a busy schedule, and the feeling that writing required long stretches of uninterrupted time, something she rarely had. One evening, during a casual conversation, she admitted something honestly. "I keep waiting for a week where everything slows down so I can finally start," she said. But that week never seemed to arrive. Eventually, Rachel tried something different. Instead of waiting for large blocks of time, she committed to a small habit, writing for 15 minutes every morning before starting her day. 15 minutes. At first, it felt almost too small to matter. But because the commitment was simple, it became sustainable. She could do it even on busy mornings. There was no pressure to produce something perfect, just to show up and write. After a few weeks, something interesting happened. The habit began to feel natural. Writing was no longer something she planned to do someday. It became part of her daily routine, like making coffee or checking the weather. Months later, those 15 minutes had produced dozens of pages. Eventually, those pages formed the foundation of the book she had talked about for years. What changed wasn't talent or opportunity. What changed was consistency. This pattern appears in almost every area of life. A person who wants to become physically stronger does not transform their body in a single workout. They transform through hundreds of workouts performed consistently over time. Someone who wants to develop confidence does not suddenly wake up fearless one morning. Confidence grows through repeated experiences of stepping slightly beyond comfort. A musician improves not through a single inspired practice session, but through thousands of small moments spent refining their craft. Daily habits quietly shape the trajectory of our lives. They create momentum, and momentum is one of the most powerful forces in personal growth. When you perform a small action consistently, the brain begins associating that behavior with your identity. If you write every day, even briefly, the mind begins accepting the identity of someone who writes. If you study a new skill regularly, the mind begins seeing you as someone who learns and grows. These identity shifts often happen slowly, but they are incredibly powerful. Because once your brain accepts a new identity, your decisions begin aligning with it automatically. This is why habits are more reliable than motivation. Motivation rises and falls depending on mood, circumstances, and energy levels. Habits, on the other hand, operate through structure. They create predictable patterns that continue even on days when motivation is low. Think of habits like small steering adjustments on a long journey. A slight turn of the wheel may seem insignificant in the moment, but over many miles, it changes the entire direction of travel. In the same way, small daily actions gradually redirect the course of a life. But there is another reason habits are so powerful. They reduce the mental effort required to take action. When a behavior becomes habitual, the brain no longer treats it as a difficult decision. It becomes automatic. For example, when someone first begins exercising regularly, they may debate with themselves each day about whether to go to the gym. But after several months, the routine becomes familiar. The question is no longer, should I exercise today? It becomes simply part of the day. This shift frees mental energy for other important decisions, and once habits begin reinforcing your goals, progress becomes easier to maintain. But building habits that support your vision requires one important principle. They must start small enough to be sustainable. Many people fail not because their goals are unrealistic, but because their starting expectations are too large. They attempt dramatic lifestyle changes all at once, hoping rapid transformation will create immediate results. But the brain resists sudden disruption. Small habits succeed because they respect the mind's need for gradual adaptation. A 5-minute practice done consistently is far more powerful than a 2-hour effort performed once a month. Consistency builds identity. Identity builds confidence. Confidence builds momentum. And momentum moves life forward. So the real question is not whether you can change your life in a single moment. The real question is this: what small action could you repeat every day that would slowly train your mind to believe in the future you want to create? Because when a habit aligns with a meaningful vision, it becomes more than just a routine. It becomes a quiet, daily vote for the person you are becoming. And once those votes begin accumulating, the direction of your life begins to change. But there is still one powerful element that strengthens this process even further. An element that determines whether someone continues their journey even when challenges appear. That element is resilience. And in the next chapter, we will explore how resilient thinking allows people to continue moving forward long after others give up. Chapter 6. Resilience. The mindset that keeps your vision alive. Every meaningful journey eventually meets resistance. At the beginning, change often feels exciting. New ideas spark motivation. A fresh vision of the future creates energy. You begin building habits, imagining possibilities, and feeling hopeful about the direction your life might take. But sooner or later, something happens. A plan doesn't work the way you expected. An opportunity disappears. Progress slows down. And in that moment, many people quietly abandon the path they once felt so certain about. Not because their dream was impossible, but because they interpreted difficulty as a sign that something was wrong. This is where resilience becomes essential. Resilience is not simply the ability to endure hardship. It is the ability to interpret challenges differently. Instead of seeing obstacles as proof that you are failing, resilient thinkers see them as part of the process of growth. They understand something that many people overlook. progress rarely moves in a straight line. It moves in cycles of effort, learning, adjustment, and improvement. I remember watching this principle unfold in someone I worked with several years ago. His name was Victor, and he had a clear goal. He wanted to transition from a technical role into a leadership position within the company. Victor was intelligent, hardworking, and respected by his team. But leadership required skills he had never practiced before. Public communication, decision-making under pressure, and guiding others through complex projects. At first, he approached the transition with enthusiasm. He volunteered for new responsibilities, joined meetings where strategic decisions were discussed, and began offering ideas during team discussions. But the early stages were not easy. In one meeting, he presented a proposal that several senior managers criticized heavily. Their feedback was blunt and direct. For a moment, the room felt uncomfortable. After the meeting, Victor admitted he felt embarrassed. Part of him wondered whether he had stepped beyond his abilities. That moment could have easily become the end of his attempt. Many people would have quietly retreated, deciding leadership simply wasn't for them. But Victor approached the situation differently. Instead of interpreting the criticism as rejection, he treated it as information. He asked a few of the managers if they would explain their concerns more clearly. He listened carefully, took notes, and spent the next few weeks refining his understanding of how strategic decisions were evaluated. When the next opportunity came to present an idea, his approach had improved. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. And slowly, over time, his confidence grew. The difference was not talent or intelligence. The difference was interpretation. Victor viewed each challenge as part of learning the role he wanted to grow into. Resilient thinking works this way. It changes the meaning we assign to setbacks. A mistake becomes feedback. A delay becomes preparation. A difficult experience becomes training. This shift in perspective keeps people moving forward long enough for improvement to occur. And improvement almost always follows persistence. Think about any skill you admire. Writing, speaking, leadership, athletics, entrepreneurship. Behind every visible success are countless moments of trial and error. Moments where something didn't work the first time, or the second, or even the 10th. But resilience allowed the person to continue experimenting until progress appeared. One reason resilience is so powerful is that it protects motivation. When someone believes failure defines their ability, motivation disappears quickly. But when someone believes failure is part of learning, motivation can survive difficult moments. This belief changes behavior dramatically. A person who expects perfection may quit after one disappointing experience. A person who expects learning continues adjusting until improvement appears. Over time, this difference in persistence creates enormous gaps in achievement. Resilient people simply stay in the process longer, but resilience is not only about pushing through difficulty. It also involves maintaining perspective. Not every setback is a personal reflection of your ability. Sometimes progress takes longer because circumstances are complex. Sometimes growth requires patience. The mind often wants immediate confirmation that effort is working. But many forms of growth develop gradually. Skills deepen slowly. Confidence builds through repeated experience. Reputation develops through consistent behavior over time. Resilient thinkers understand this timeline. They focus less on immediate outcomes and more on continuous improvement. This mindset removes unnecessary pressure from the process of growth. Instead of asking, "Did I succeed today?" they ask a different question. "Did I learn something today that will help me improve tomorrow?" That simple shift keeps momentum alive, and momentum is often more important than perfection. Because when people continue moving forward, even slowly, they remain connected to their vision. And the longer someone stays connected to a meaningful goal, the more likely they are to eventually reach it. But resilience becomes even stronger when it is supported by a deeper sense of purpose. Purpose acts like a compass during difficult moments. It reminds you why the journey matters in the first place. When challenges appear, purpose keeps the direction clear. It says, "This path is still worth walking." And when purpose combines with resilient thinking, something remarkable happens. Temporary obstacles stop feeling like the end of the road. They become part of the road. Yet there is one more element that strengthens this entire process. An element that connects identity, repetition, emotion, habits, and resilience into a single powerful system. That element is clarity of vision. Because when your vision becomes clear enough, it begins guiding your decisions almost automatically. And that is exactly what we will explore in the next chapter. Chapter 7. Clarity of Vision. Seeing the life you are moving toward. There is a powerful difference between hoping for a better life and clearly seeing the life you want to create. Hope is vague. Vision is specific. Hope says, "I want things to get better someday." Vision says, "This is the direction I'm moving toward." The mind responds very differently to these two states. When a goal is vague, the brain struggles to organize action around it. Effort feels scattered. Motivation fades easily because there is no clear picture guiding decisions. But when a vision becomes clear, something remarkable happens. Your mind begins filtering opportunities differently. Situations that once felt unrelated suddenly appear connected to the direction you want to move. Choices become easier to evaluate. Even small decisions start aligning with a larger purpose. Clarity acts like a compass. Without it, people wander. With it, people navigate. I once saw the impact of clear vision through a friend named Marcus. For several years, Marcus felt stuck in a job that provided stability but very little excitement. He often talked about wanting more freedom, more creativity, and the ability to design his own schedule. But when someone asked what he actually wanted to do instead, his answer was usually uncertain. "I just want something different," he would say. And because the goal was unclear, his actions remained inconsistent. Some weeks, he explored new ideas. Other weeks, he ignored the question entirely and simply focused on getting through the workday. Then something shifted. Marcus attended a small workshop about personal development where the speaker asked a simple question. If your life improved dramatically over the next 5 years, what would a normal Tuesday look like? The question caught Marcus off guard. It wasn't about success in the abstract, it was about everyday experience. That evening, he spent time writing down details he had never considered carefully before. He imagined waking up without rushing through traffic. He imagined working on projects that required creativity and problem solving. He imagined collaborating with people who enjoyed building ideas rather than simply maintaining routines. He even imagined where he would work. A quiet environment where he could think clearly and focus deeply. For the first time, the future wasn't just a wish. It was a picture. Once that picture existed, Marcus began noticing opportunities that previously felt invisible. He realized that many of the skills required for the life he imagined involved digital design and creative problem solving, areas he had always been curious about but never seriously explored. So, he started learning. At first it was small steps, online tutorials, short courses, experimenting with simple projects during evenings. The process wasn't dramatic, but something had changed. Every action now felt connected to a direction. Clarity had turned curiosity into movement. This is one of the most powerful functions of vision. It organizes effort. When your mind knows what you are moving toward, it naturally begins identifying behaviors that support that direction. Even motivation begins to feel different. Instead of pushing yourself through tasks that feel meaningless, you begin pulling yourself toward activities that align with your vision. That sense of alignment makes consistency much easier. But clarity of vision does something even more important. It strengthens belief. When you regularly imagine the life you want to create, not just the outcome, but the daily experience, your brain begins treating that image as a possible reality. The more vividly you see it, the more familiar it becomes. And familiarity reduces the feeling of distance between where you are and where you want to be. This is why visualization is such a powerful tool when practiced correctly. It is not about pretending success already exists. It is about rehearsing possibility. Athletes often use visualization before competitions. They imagine movements, timing, and strategy long before the event begins. By the time they step onto the field, the experience already feels partially familiar. Your mind can do the same with the life you want to build. When you regularly picture yourself living according to your vision, working, learning, interacting, solving problems, your brain begins adapting to that identity. And once the identity begins shifting, behavior follows naturally. However, clarity of vision does not mean predicting every detail of the future. Life will always contain surprises. Instead, clarity means understanding the direction you want your life to grow toward. Growth, freedom, creativity, contribution, learning. These values shape the type of experiences you seek and the decisions you make when opportunities appear. Marcus did not know exactly where his journey would lead when he began learning design. But within 2 years, the skills he practiced consistently opened unexpected doors. Freelance projects appeared. Connections with creative professionals expanded his network. Eventually, he transitioned into work that offered far more flexibility and creative challenge than his previous role. The transformation didn't happen instantly, but it began the moment his vision became clear. Clarity gave his mind something to move toward, and once the mind has a meaningful direction, effort becomes purposeful. But there is still one final element that ties all of these ideas together. Identity, repetition, emotion, habits, resilience, and vision are powerful individually. Yet when they operate together, they create something even more transformative. They create alignment. Alignment between what you believe, what you imagine, and what you do every day. And when alignment appears, progress accelerates. In the next chapter, we will explore how bringing all of these elements together allows you to train your mind in a way that naturally attracts the life you want to create. Chapter 8. Alignment. When your mind, actions, and vision move in the same direction, there is a moment in personal growth when everything begins to feel different. Not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because your inner world and your outer actions begin moving in the same direction. This moment is called alignment. Alignment happens when your beliefs, your habits, and your vision for the future start supporting each other instead of working against each other. For many people, the opposite is often true. They may dream about a certain life, but their daily habits contradict that dream. They may hope for growth, but internally they still doubt their abilities. They may imagine success, yet their actions continue reinforcing the identity of someone who stays small. When these elements are disconnected, progress feels difficult. You move forward a little, then hesitate. You feel inspired one day, then uncertain the next. But when alignment begins to appear, something powerful changes. Your thoughts encourage your actions reinforce your beliefs, and your beliefs support the vision you are moving toward. Suddenly, progress feels more natural. It is not effortless, but it is smoother. I once watched this transformation happen in someone I'd known for years. Her name was Lauren. For most of her career, Lauren worked in a field that provided financial stability but very little personal satisfaction. She often spoke about wanting to create something meaningful, something that allowed her creativity and curiosity to play a larger role in her work. For a long time, though, her life felt divided. Part of her imagined a more fulfilling future. Another part of her believed it was unrealistic. Because of that internal conflict, her actions remained cautious. She occasionally explored creative projects during weekends, but she never committed fully to developing those skills. Each time she made a little progress, doubt would quietly slow her down. Then something changed. Lauren began approaching personal growth differently. Instead of focusing only on the results she wanted, she began focusing on alignment. She asked herself 3 simple questions. What kind of person do I want to become? What daily habits would that person practice? What kind of future would naturally grow from those habits? These questions shifted her attention from distant outcomes to present behavior. Instead of imagining success as something that might happen someday, she began living as someone already moving in that direction. Her mornings started differently. She spent time reading and learning about creative problem solving. She practiced small projects that allowed her ideas to take shape. She connected with people who shared similar interests. None of these actions were dramatic, but they were consistent. And over time, consistency began changing her internal beliefs, because each small action was evidence that she was becoming the person she once imagined. Alignment had begun. This process works in a fascinating way. When your actions repeatedly support a new identity, your brain gradually accepts that identity as real. When your identity changes, your decisions begin aligning naturally with that new version of yourself. And when your decisions align with your vision, progress becomes steady. Think of alignment like a river flowing in the right direction. When the current is moving smoothly, even small efforts carry you forward. But when the current is moving against you, every step feels exhausting. Many people struggle not because they lack talent or opportunity, but because their internal current flows in different directions. Their thoughts doubt what their goals desire. Their habits contradict what their vision requires. Alignment resolves that conflict. It creates harmony between intention and behavior. But alignment also requires patience, because it develops through repetition. Every time you choose an action that supports the life you want to create, you strengthen the alignment between who you are today and who you are becoming. And the more often that alignment appears, the easier future decisions become. You begin asking different questions. Instead of wondering, what should I do today? You ask something more powerful. What would the person I'm becoming choose in this moment? That question has a quiet influence on behavior. A person becoming healthier chooses movement. A person becoming financially disciplined chooses learning and careful decisions. A person becoming confident chooses opportunities to practice courage. Each choice strengthens identity. Each action reinforces belief, and belief continues guiding action. Over time, these cycles create momentum that feels almost automatic. Opportunities appear, and you recognize them more easily because they match the direction you are already moving. Challenges appear, but resilience allows you to treat them as part of growth rather than signs of failure. Habits continue supporting progress even when motivation fluctuates, and vision keeps the destination clear. Identity, repetition, emotion, habits, resilience, vision. When these elements align, the mind becomes a powerful guide rather than a source of hesitation. You no longer feel like you are forcing change. Instead, you feel like you are gradually growing into the life you once imagined. This is how many meaningful transformations actually happen, not through sudden miracles, but through consistent alignment between thought, emotion, and action. And when that alignment continues long enough, something remarkable begins to appear. The life you once imagined slowly becomes the life you are living. But this journey does not end with understanding these principles. The real transformation begins when you start applying them intentionally in your own life. And in the final part of this audiobook, we will bring everything together so you can begin training your mind day by day to move toward the life you truly want to create. As we reach the end of this journey together, take a moment to pause and reflect on everything we've explored in this audiobook. We began with a simple but powerful idea. Your mind is constantly shaping the life you experience. Often quietly, often invisibly, your beliefs, thoughts, and daily habits are influencing the direction of your future. Many people spend years wishing for change without realizing that the most important transformation begins inside the mind. In the beginning, we talked about mental programming, the invisible beliefs that guide how you interpret opportunities, challenges, and even your own potential. These beliefs are not fixed truths. They are patterns that have been learned over time, and anything that has been learned can also be reshaped. From there, we explored one of the most important shifts anyone can make: changing identity. Instead of only focusing on what you want to achieve, you begin focusing on who you are becoming. Because when your identity evolves, your decisions naturally begin to align with the life you want to create. We then looked at the power of repetition. The mind begins believing what it hears and experiences consistently. This is why the thoughts you expose yourself to every day matter so much. When empowering ideas are repeated often enough, they begin replacing the old stories that once limited your growth. But repetition alone is not enough. Emotion is what gives those ideas strength. When you connect your vision of the future with genuine excitement, curiosity, or purpose, your brain begins treating that vision as something meaningful and important. That emotional connection turns distant goals into motivations that influence your behavior. Then we talked about daily habits, the small actions that quietly transform a vision into reality. Life rarely changes through dramatic moments. Instead, it changes through consistent behaviors repeated over time. Every small action becomes a vote for the person you are becoming. We also explored resilience, the mindset that allows people to continue moving forward even when progress feels slow or uncertain. Every meaningful journey includes challenges, but resilient thinkers understand that obstacles are not signs of failure. They are part of the process of growth. Clarity of vision was another key piece of this puzzle. When you clearly imagine the life you want to create, your mind begins recognizing opportunities that align with that direction. Your decisions become easier, your motivation becomes stronger, and your actions become more purposeful. And finally, we brought everything together with the idea of alignment. When your beliefs, emotions, habits, and vision begin moving in the same direction, progress starts to feel natural. You're no longer fighting against your own mind. Instead, your mind becomes one of your greatest allies. Now, the most important part begins. Understanding these ideas is valuable, but their real power appears when you begin applying them in your daily life. Start small. Pay attention to the thoughts you repeat to yourself. Choose habits that support the person you want to become. Imagine your future clearly and allow yourself to feel excited about the possibilities ahead. Day by day, these small choices begin shaping a new direction.